Good morning and welcome to the annual WARP meeting in Golden, Colorado. We're happy to see everybody here. We started a tradition a year ago of doing a land acknowledgement at the beginning of all of our face-to-face meetings. And I have to admit that I borrowed this from the University of Denver website since I don't live locally. We would like to recognize that the greater city of Denver reside within the traditional territories of the Hinoina, Arapaho, Tsitsitsa, the Cheyenne, and Nunsi Ute tribes. We recognize the descendant communities of the Northern Cheyenne tribe of Montana, the Northern Arapaho tribe of Wyoming, the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma, the Southern Ute Indian tribe, and the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. We also acknowledge that over 40 different indigenous nations continue to be in relationship with the lands currently called Colorado. Denver is home to many different citizens of indigenous nations, and we recognize their enduring presence on this land by paying respects to their elders, both past and present. Please take a moment to consider the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and resettlement that bring us together today, and please join us in uncovering such truths at all public events. Now is a time to reflect upon and personally reconcile how the genocidal acts against indigenous communities intersect with our learning, collaboration, and sharing of knowledge. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I'm up here to introduce Lynda Teller Pete, who is a Navajo Diné weaver. She has written a couple of books about it that you can see on her table out there, and I'm sure buy. And Lynda and I know each other. We first met actually in Tincuy in Peru, Tincuy was a very big deal international conference for indigenous weavers throughout from anywhere in the world. So they mostly were from Peru, but they were from other countries also. And so we had a wonderful time visiting there with Lynda and her sister Barbara. And we've seen each other on several occasions since then, which is, of course, always a treat for me. Lynda teaches Navajo weaving, which is very controversial for some people because there are those who say, cultural appropriation, you shouldn't be teaching this to anybody because they'll steal it. And so we've had conversations about that. And her books, I think, are extraordinary. They're from Thrum's books, which is where my books are from, and so we got to be friends on that basis also. And she's here today to share part of her story, which is wonderful, and it's very exciting. So, Lynda Teller Pete.
Thank you, Deborah. Sorry. Yat she ha Lynda Teller Pete lin she to head leaning shlon tabai shlon to head leaning bashchin hat nagahni dashinale ashchi dashit she beltaset sode yesenasha ade hashamadosh Ruth Teller do Sam Teller ade she yaholia. Good morning. My name is Lynda Teller Pete. I am born for the Edgewater clan, born for Two Waters That Flow Together, which is my father's clan, the Red Bottoms clan, which is my maternal grandfather's clan, and One Who Walks Around, which is my paternal grandfather. And that's how Navajo people usually establish kinship, by announcing who we are. And I grew up at the Two Gray Hills, Newcomb, New Mexico, part of the Navajo Nation. That's where my mother and father, Ruth Teller and Sam Teller, have raised me. And then I introduced myself land stewards in the state of Colorado. But we've lived here for 30 years, and I still say it's my temporary home. Because most Navajo people, their dream is to return home someday. And so that's why we always say, I live here, but I live here temporarily. Like my sister Barbara has lived in Tucson, and she's been there for almost 33 years, and she still says Tucson is her temporary home as well. But I'm very pleased to be here. And my family and I have been weaving for a long time. When I was growing up, I thought everybody knew how to weave. And it wasn't until I left home that I realized that there are Navajo families that are jewelers, Navajo families that are potters, basket makers, moccasin makers. There are livestock owners, horse people, cattle people, sheep people. And there's a variety of Navajo people that live on the Navajo Nation. And it just so happened that in my community, we were all weavers. And my mother's a weaver, my grandmother on my maternal side and my paternal side were weavers, and I'm the 5th generation. And I always say there probably were more, and I'm probably maybe 6th or 7th, but we can only go back about 4 generations to identify our matriarch that was a weaver. And so sadly, we lost our mother in 2014. And so right now, my sister Barbara has taken the role of matriarch of our family. She's my older sister, and I'm the youngest in a family of 5 siblings. And I probably learned how to weave about 6 years old. My dad made us these looms where we would sit facing each other. And and I'm the younger kid, so I had more time to play, and I would have an arsenal of weaving tools. And I would take one out like a batten, and I would stick it through my warps trying to bug my sister who's, studiously working. She's a master weaver. And she would say, "Cut it out." And I would keep doing it until she screams, and then my mom would come, and she would say, "I wish you guys would get along." And she would put a sheet between us so that we didn't have to see each other, because you can see each other through those warps. And I would still torture her with my batten tools, which, now I respect the tools, because the tools are what makes us weavers. And as our medicine people tell us all the time, that when we have tools, when we have our battens and our combs and everything, that's what makes us a rich person. And it's our tools of the trade. It's our tools against poverty. It's a tool against laziness. It's a tool against everything that kind of comes to your mind that prevents you from weaving. So that was my upbringing. And the next photo has photos of my granddaughter Roxanne, and my weavers and my family are my sister, her children, Michael and Sierra. And I always like to show a photo of the middle photo was taken by a guest who's here, Ann Hedlund, Dr. Ann Hedlund. We did about 15 or 17 years with the Arizona State Museum, and we would have our own little tent. And our family used to laugh about that and say, we had our own carny tent. But Anne was very, very kind in letting us show the world the whole family of weavers. My aunts would be there carding, my cousins would be weaving, and it was just to showcase that there was one community that was very cohesive in weaving together. And so we really bonded. I knew my relatives, we would visit and things like that, but we just weren't exposed to each other weaving. And that, the 15 or some odd years that we did the Arizona State Southwest Indian Fair was a time for us to really bond as weavers. And it really strengthened our resolve to become probably the ambassadors of Navajo weaving. And Deborah mentioned that I do get some pushback for people saying, you should not be teaching to other people. But how else are people going to know about Navajo weaving? We're not training people to become Navajo weavers. We're giving them an insight into how the work is done, how hard it is, how we have survived as a people with our weaving skills. Then the next slide shows, the next slide shows my two grandmothers, Susie Tom and her mother, Diné Ibitsit, and they did a collaborative piece, which you see behind them. And this was probably done in the probably late 40s, early 50s timeframe, and it's the rug was recently brought back to the Taulina area, which is just above Tugre Hills, at the Taulina Trading Post. And that particular piece has color in it. It has the aqua and it has yellow in it. And most people know that Tugre Hills, where I'm from, our colors are all blended with natural colors. But this particular piece, because of the time frame, it does have some color in it. And wherever we went, my aunts would always work with my mom. And I had aunts that had sheep. So if you can see the color that they're carding, it's kind of like a reddish brown wool. That's all natural. And so our family is known for the Tugre Hill style of weaving, and that red-brown is a very signatory color of our family. And the darker it is, the wool comes from younger lambs, and the lighter it is, it comes from older sheep. And and then the rest of the colors are all blended, like the grays and the tans and all the colors in between are all blended colors. And that's how our style developed, probably from the 1920s, 30s, 40s. And my grandmother on my father's side is not photographed, but her stories live within us. Her songs and her prayers live within us more so than my maternal grandmother. And there's slight differences amongst all Navajo families because of what happened to us historically. From 1863 to 1868, the Army was tasked with rounding up the Navajos, taken to Bosco Redondo, which is just below the Texas borderline, north of Albuquerque, I think. And that's where we were imprisoned until we signed our treaty. And the treaty was signed in 1868, and the Navajos were allowed to come home. Now, the Army keeps meticulous records of everything that they do, everything that they have. And so in their inventory of December of 1864, there were 630 looms that were inventoried. So we know that our people were still weaving in the prison camps, and that's probably saved a lot of relatives. And that's probably why I'm here today, because my grandfather was born, he was born in the prison camp, and he was brought back to Canyon de Chelly, where he's from, in a cradle board. And so he died in 1971, I think, and he was 103. And so from him, from his lineage, that's how we know our songs and our prayers. Now, my grandmother on my maternal side, she was kind of hampered by the government schools, where the schools won't allow you to speak your language, to practice your culture, and all that kind of stuff. And so a lot of things have happened, but I think weaving has persevered in our family, and it's been really strong. The next photo shows my two sisters, my two older sisters. Roseanne is the one in blue, and Barbara is the one in red. And unfortunately, we lost our sister in 1996, Roseanne, the older one. But she was considered the most prolific of all of our weavers in the family. When our mother taught us the basics of weaving, however, it was Roseanne that really concentrated on making sure we knew our color combinations, that we looked for quality rather than quantity. And she would walk around with a yardstick, and she would measure like every inch that we would weave up. And if you made a mistake, she'd make you take it out. And, I always thought, man, that woman is bossy. But one day I came back for a weekend from high school, because I used to go to a residential school, and I came home for the weekend, and my mom had started a new piece, and she probably had woven maybe about 8 inches. And my sister walked in, and she looked at my mom's piece, and she goes, "Oh, Mom, that's awful." And we laughed because we thought she was joking. She was not joking. And I kept thinking, why would you say that to Mom? You know, she's the one who taught you how to weave. But my mom looked at it and she goes, what is wrong with it? And my sister said, the colors are not complementary. And when I walked in, I just saw a big blob. I didn't see the definitive little design boxes. And my mom walked back and she looked at it and she goes, you're right. So she took it out. And at that time I thought, oh my God, that is what makes her tick. That's what makes her the best at what she does. And from her, we really learned about our own growth as weavers, not just production workers to keep the family fed. It was our growth in our artistry that I recognized. And the textile that you see behind them won the 1987 Best of Show at Santa Fe Indian Market. That was the piece that set the tone for a lot of weavers to start selling on their own. Because when my sisters were working on that piece for 4 years, they decided on a price. They decided that they were going to sell it on their own and keep all the money and not sell to the middlemen, which were circling. They would come to our mom's house and sort of make deals, and my sister would not budge about that. So they took it to Santa Fe Indian Market. It got all these ribbons, and it got written up in so many periodicals. And the couple that came in to buy it, they owned a software company in Texas. And my sister said, we want to know where this piece goes. And we want visiting privileges. We want, and they got all of that. You know, the couple flew them and their husbands to Texas, to Sugar Land, Texas, and showed them where on the wall it would go. And he had several other pieces of both of them. They weren't aware that this man had been collecting pieces of their work at Santa Fe Indian Market. And so he had lined up all of Roseanne's on the one side and Barbara's and then some of my mom's pieces. And unfortunately, the couple divorced, and the biggest fight was over that piece. And by that time, my older sister was gone, and so Barbara offered to make him another one. And so, you know, he... And things about the collectors that collect these works of art, you know, and it has not been an isolated incident, because many people who buy pieces, they really should write it in their prenuptials. Because Barbara has had to weave additional pieces to keep the peace in their divorce proceedings. And the next photo you see is of another piece that Barbara did on her own, and it won the Best of Show. Now, Barbara has had a long struggle in getting recognized as an artist, and most people considered Navajo weavers as craft people working for pen money, and that's what a lot of that is written in books about that, but. In her world, what she wanted to do was to see if she could challenge herself to make a bigger piece all on her own, and also to really bump up her living situation. And so the big piece that they made earlier secured their homes. Both sisters were able to purchase homes. And with this piece, she was able to purchase her former husband's graduate school in pharmacy. So, you know, that's how that goes. But she's still weaving. In fact, she is weaving a huge piece for a noted basketball player. And so people seek her out. You know, and they, I've heard collectors say in Santa Fe Indian Market, when people are kind of milling around our booth, just kind of hemming and hawing about whether to buy a piece or not, one of them will always chirp up and say, if you have a collection of Navajo textiles, your collection is worthless if you don't have a Barbara or an Alice. And I truly, truly believe that. Next photo shows us at Santa Fe Indian Market, and we also do Herds Fair in March. And Barbara has been doing these shows for over, let's see, my nephew is 39, and when he introduces himself, and he always says, I've been going to Santa Fe Indian Market for 40 years, because my sister was pregnant with him at Santa Fe Indian Market. But the market has always been a time for us to be able to garner our, like, more than 50% of our annual income there. And it's a time when we are able to sell on our own, and we do pay taxes on it. So, you know, it's something that people don't know. Like, most people assume that Native people don't pay taxes. We pay a lot of taxes to the city of Santa Fe. When I return here, I pay taxes here for the pieces that I sell. So it's a business as well as an artistry. And in Santa Fe, that's where Barbara raised a lot of her kids. Barbara did a residency at the Herd Museum, where she started getting the notoriety that she has now. And in her growth, she has gone on to not just make Two Gray Hill rugs, but she has branched on to period pieces. And that's from her residency at the Herd Museum, where she was exposed to period pieces such as the Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. These are like the old style blankets from the 1800s. And people would ask her, can you make that style? And she was like, oh, I don't know. But she would do it. And the first year that she started doing it, my mom and my aunts were horrified. And when she came home, they said, you can't do that. You're a Two Gray Hills weaver. And Barbara said, I got to feed my family. If this is what sells, this is what I'm going to do. So she really had to buck the system. And she has been a trailblazer in knocking down doors, knocking down rules, procedures, policy for me, because I had a much easier time just following her trail. But she has always challenged herself to become not just a weaver, but a full-fledged artist. And early on, when Mattel came out with their Barbie dolls, it came with, like, this is a kind of like a colonized outfit that I have on. And Navajo people started making clothes like this when they were at Bosco Redondo, when they were seeing the wives of the army officers there. And they were able to secure calico fabric, velveteen fabric for their shirts. But before then, we wore rug dresses. And in our tradition, a weaver cannot weave your own dress. It has to be woven for you. And the weaver that you choose, their values, their way of life has to match yours. And it's an honor to wear something that another weaver has woven for you. And the mantas are those little blankets that we wear. And, you know, there's more times that people have come to our booth saying, I'm looking for a chief blanket. I was like, you and everybody else. You know, what's so great about that? People think that it's very valuable, but it's menswear that were made for trade. And the stripes that you see, those big, thick black and white stripes, stood for how many horses they were traded for. And but nobody values women's wear. Nobody values their mantas. Nobody values their dresses. In fact, when they got a hold of dresses, what they would do was take it apart and sell one piece to another museum and to another piece to a different museum. And it's so disrespectful to Navajo women and to the weaver of that dress. And I've been doing a lot of work with museums, and miraculously, sometimes two panels have found each other. And we had an accidental pairing at the Fields Museum last October when we asked the curator to pull single panel dresses. And we poured over one, and then another table kind of got rolled in. We looked at it, we said, didn't we just look at this? And then we realized that it was the same panel, and they had come in at different times. And the younger curator looked at us and said, "Should these two pieces be together?" And we all shouted, "Yes!" And I don't think that would have happened in a different generation, because it was always museum policy not to reunite things like that. And my home museum here in Denver, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, is going to give me an opportunity on June 5th to reunite a single panel dress. And we're going to do it with the new conservator that just got hired. So to show true collaboration between museum professionals and the communities where these articles come from, that we care for these pieces to make sure that they're respected and treated in a way that will leave a legacy for the younger generation to see. And that's my hope. That has been my whole mission. And so when Barbara made these Barbie dolls, people looked at it and kind of went, "You're a weaver, why are you doing this?" And she said, I just want a doll that looks like me. And we grew up with dolls that we couldn't get with dark hair. We couldn't find dolls that had skin color like us. And so we had to play with dolls that didn't look like us. And so this was an opportunity for her to show the younger girls that came to our booth that we now are in an age where we can have dresses like this for Barbies. And it didn't make quite a splash until the Barbie movie came out. And then I wrote a little post on it on Facebook, and then Barbara got besieged with, interview requests, magazine requests. I mean, it was just ridiculous how it went. And so I'm going to take that doll over to the museum, and I'm going to leave it out for the kids to touch, because we're not allowed to touch any of the textiles in the museum storage, and good reason for that. But also my own dress will be on display. So it has taken a long time, but the collaboration has been great. And my growth as a weaver has been a little different. I was the first one that entered my pieces for shows at the Gallup Ceremonial as a 12-year-old. And I won ribbons for that. And I always tease my older sisters, both of whom have so many ribbons that they could fill like 20 shoe boxes or something, that I was the first one that won a ribbon over them. And that was my claim to fame. And but for me growing up, my biggest thing was I didn't like to sell. I didn't like the marketing part of it, and I would just leave it to my mom and my sisters to sell it for me. And I went through college, and my mother wove to put me, to buy my books and get all the things that my scholarship didn't cover. And when I graduated, I made this big announcement to my family. I have a college degree, I'm gonna get a job, and I don't have to depend on weaving anymore. You guys are weavers, that's cool. I'm gonna come and see you at Indian Market, give you, cook for you, whatever you want me to do, I'll do. But I'm not weaving anymore. And it was until when we lost our older sister in 1996 that I started thinking about her children. She left 2 boys. They were pre-adult boys, but I knew that they would be married soon, that they would have children, and I thought, who's going to teach those kids how to weave? And who is going, because she was our keeper of our stories, and I took that on. So I'm now the keeper of the family stories. I am now the person who makes sure that the granddaughter that came along, and she's 21 years old, she's in the Navy, but we got her started at 4 years old. And both her parents were in the Army, and they need my nephew Terry got out of the Army and had to take a job, but he couldn't afford childcare. So my husband and me, we took Roxanne into our home at age 4, and we kept her for 9 summers. She would go back to be with her father during the school year, but we kept her in the summertime and made sure that she knew how to weave. And we're so proud of the lineage that my older sister, Roseanne, left so that we could continue to do this. And without my mom and my aunts hampering me about trying to be a true Two Gray Hill Weavers, I wove on a different level than my sister. Only that the stories that were going to be told from these pieces were important to me rather than me, for her story, it was different where she had to maintain a household, how to provide for her husband and for her children. I didn't have that issue. I was in a different financial situation to where I could concentrate more on the stories that my textiles would tell. And so the mochi, the blue one that I wove that in response to a young relative whose family had turned to Christianity. And there's nothing wrong with that, other than if you go that route, you should still maintain some of our own culture. But it was different. And the fact that, their belief was not in science, their belief was not there, that made me very concerned for the younger people that I teach. And so the mochi that I wove has an explosion of things. And I put it up in the gallery at Idlewild, California. And one of my collectors showed up. And he looked at it, I could see his eyes just kind of trailing it. And then he walked over to me and he goes, "Did you do that piece?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And he goes, "Oh," I said, "What do you see in it?" Now, mind you, he's a rocket scientist. And so he looks at it and he goes, "It looks like the Big Bang." I go, "Okay, well, go walk and see the title." So he walks over there and it says The Big Bang. And then he turned around and he had this wide smile on his face and he was just like, so, he got it. And so it's to me saying, as Navajo weavers, when we sit at our loom, we sit at the universe. We have the sky bar, we have the earth bar, we have the night and the day, we have the lightning and the thunder and the Nats Elite, which is the rainbow area. All of that is in our looms. And for us, there is the Big Bang. There is that belief in science. There is belief in the astronomy, and everything is connected. We are connected to our environment. We take care of our environment. And I wanted to say it with that piece. And the very first person who admired Navajo weaving got it. And to me, that was a crowning achievement for me. And then the other piece is just about the migration of dragonflies. And that's the red piece is a child's blanket. And it's displayed over at the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture right now until next June 2025, I think. And it's just the migration of dragonflies. And a lot of the migration goes to where they get trapped underneath the ice. That's that little blurry black and white area. Those are the little ice crystals. And they have to go over foliage and mountains to get to their migration. And about 70 to 75% of dragonflies don't ever make it back from migration. And so for me, it's a symbol of our resiliency and our ability to bounce back and keep surviving. And that was my message with that particular piece. And the middle that I have that little cheesy grin on, I entered Santa Fe Indian Market doing beadwork. And for 4 years, I exhibited with beadwork. And my sister kept saying, "You need to jury in as a textile person." And I kept thinking, you win all the awards. My nephew's great. My niece is great. I just think that I need to be different. And she kept hounding me until I finally entered. And the very first year that I entered was 2004. We walked into the ballroom at the convention center. We walked to the textile area, and my piece had a blue ribbon on it. And Barbara's piece was next to mine, and she had a second place. And I was like, I wonder if they got these confused. But it was, I took it as, okay, this is a fluke. It's only going to happen one time, and I'm going to make the best of it, and I'm going to let everybody know that Barbara took second. And And it was really funny where, and in our family, there's really no competition between us as weavers. We are our biggest cheerleaders. And she allowed me to have my crowning moment of being recognized as a weaver. And in our family, when one person wins, we all win. And it brings people into our booths. And the thing is, the first person that sells has to buy dinner. And sometimes there are times where we'll sell two together to the same collector or something, and then we split the ticket. And it's happened over and over with the ribbons that I thought about it later, and I thought, okay, it was good validation of getting a blue ribbon, but the thing was, I learned the lessons that my mom put out. I learned the lessons of both of my sisters. Barbara, who is my biggest mentor, taught me everything she knew to where I'm achieving, and that to me was the bigger prize. And so, me as a student, Barbara has 2 children, and when Sierra was born, Sierra was the first girl that we had in that generation. In her generation, there were 21 boys, and she was the first girl that was born in that generation, and we couldn't have been happier. And we're like, oh, a weaver is born, you know. And my mom took the spider web from one of the corners of her kitchen, and we rubbed it into her palms to solidify that she would become a weaver. And it was our homage to Spider Woman, who gave us the gift of weaving. And Sierra grew up with such a strong personality that she came out knowing everything. And we had such a tumultuous time with trying to get her to sit still, trying to get her, give her the lessons, and she just kept saying, nope, I know what I'm doing. And it was really hard, but she continued. But it was Michael. Michael is 4 years younger than Sierra. And in the Navajo culture, we don't have specific genders for certain tasks. If you need something done, it's not like only a female can do it or only a male can do it. It's who's closer to what that task needs to be done, and you do it. And so there are tremendous great weavers that are male, and it's unfortunate that in the 70s that a lot of traders refused to recognize that and put female relatives' names on the male weavers' pieces, and really did them a disservice. And so when Michael was 12, he asked his mother, how come you're not teaching me how to weave? And Barbara's exhausted from teaching Sierra. But Michael was different. He took to it like a duck on water. And he is so, his mind is just pixelated with things that he sees, and he animates things. And we got them to do 2 grays, but he also is doing a lot of comic book heroes and anime, and he's brought a whole new, different type of collectors into our booth because people want to collect his pieces. And a lot of his pieces are collected by artists themselves, which is a new standard for our family anyway. But both of them are weavers, and now Sierra has 2 boys. And last year, we had her son, the 7-year-old, in our weaving class, and he started a piece, and he was going to continue this piece this summer. And the younger one is 1, and so he's got some things that are coming for him. But both kids are well aware that this tradition will continue. And Roseanne's granddaughter, Roxanne, she is fearless. She's a fearless weaver. And we had her starting with 2 grays. And, first I kind of had her do some stripes and stuff because she was 4. And I had her weaving from 4, 5, 6, 7, just doing little stripes. And then she wanted to get into borders. And I said, it's really hard to do borders to keep them straight. She goes, it looks easy, I'm gonna do it. And I thought, I'm gonna have to babysit her, I'm gonna have to take things out, but I didn't. And it was just in her to do what her grandmother would do. And it was just amazing to me. And then we got her started with the tapestry quality. So the one where she has that pink hair, she likes to match her hair with her pieces. That was her last blue ribbon when she was 17 at Indian Market, and then she entered the Navy after that. But she's going to continue, and we can't wait to have her have kids so that she can get started teaching them. See how hard it is to teach. And so Barbara and I have been teaching a long time, and lately we have really been concentrating on our Navajo students. We teach them a lot different than how we teach our non-natives. And the Heard Museum came to us with a grant saying we want to teach Navajo people how to weave by their own peers. And so the first class that they told us that we would have at the Navajo Nation Museum, they said we're going to get a lot of young weavers, just do what you can. We were so excited. We went down there, but young is not what we got. The people who signed up were in their mid-30s all the way up to age 77, way older than us. And it turned out that the people who were interested are the people who had to move off the Navajo Nation to get jobs, to get educated, but they were coming back to the Navajo Nation. Like I said, this was my temporary home. People go back to live within the 4 sacred mountains, and they wanted to learn how to weave. And so it's been our pleasure to teach a lot of young, mid-career, and older Navajos and to reconnect them with their weaving linkages. And a lot of them have gone on to become teachers, which we're so proud of. And my husband, Melvin, is a mechanical engineer, and so he's been tinkering with modifying our looms, modifying our tools to make things easier, and it's been such a great movement. And the other passion that we have, Barbara and me, is to work with museums. We've worked with the Bard Graduate Center in New York, and we had a major exhibit. Actually, we started working on this about 6 years ago, and then COVID happened. So we had to, we stopped working on it, and then everything came back on as gangbusters, and we started working on it again, and we had our major Shaped by the Loom exhibition at the Bard Center in New York. And we've also taken other trips to Peru, where I met Deborah, I met a whole bunch of people down in Kinkui, and that was my first trip, like a weaving trip out of the country. Barbara's used to it because in the Obama years, she was the official Navajo ambassador for Navajo weaving. And Obama, well, actually, she worked for Hillary because it's under the State Department. And she was sent to Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Peru 2 times, Mexico. I mean, she went all over to work with local weavers in their communities. We also, got my slides mixed up. This is the Peru one. But we went there in our rug dresses, and it was amazing to see all the other weavers in their native regalia as well. And I was so impressed with their hats. And we were waiting for the parade to start, and we were all standing around, and I kept hearing phones ring, but I noticed that the women weren't carrying purses. They were just standing there, but their phones were ringing. And I kept looking, and their phones are in their hats. And I was like, whoa, if I could learn how to put a phone in my hair bun, that would be great. But it takes time. But anyway, we also, if I can go back to 2 slides back, there we go. Okay, I think that's we took a trip to Mexico, to Oaxaca, 2 Marches ago. And that's the year that I became a fellow for the Luce Indigenous Scholar program. And first time with a fellowship with monetary support. And so when my sister told me she was doing a project with Porfirio Gutierrez, who's a well-known dyer and weaver from Oaxaca, and he's from Teoteclan de Vaya, the Zapotac community. I wanted to go because for years, Navajo people and Zapotacs have been at odds because of the use of our designs. And I wanted to go to the village, I wanted to learn all about them and to take a dye workshop. And so I called up Lisa Falk, who was heading the program, and I shamelessly said, I have a new fellowship. I would like to travel with you, and I'll pay my own way. Is this possible? And she said, yes. And I thought, ooh, that was easy. I just thought I'd have to, bring out some big guns or something. But my husband and me, we traveled down there and learned a lot about Porfirio and his family. And we often needed translators. But the thing was, the way that they were taught when they were young was the same as us. They were interested in keeping their traditions as well. And their dyes, their native dyes, how they do the collection, how they don't take the whole plant. Everything was as us. And they said, well, I said, how is it that you guys are doing our designs then? And Porfirio said, it's not no fault of ours, because in the 60s, people from the States wanted faster, cheaper Navajo textiles. And also in the 60s, when President Kennedy did his Peace Corps, a lot of well-meaning people went into Central America and South America and took Navajo weaving books. So now a lot of those weaving families, there are 2 to 3 generations of them making Navajo designs. So to them, it's now tradition. And they don't know that some of these traditions are sacred to us. Like even in my weaving classes, I will not have anybody weave a storm. I won't have them weave a yei. I won't have them weave certain things that have deeper meaning. They can just do generic stuff. And so we talked about it, and I met some people at the Textile Museum, and we said, wouldn't it be great if we could find some foundation money to bring a group of Navajo weavers down here with some medicine people, meet with the Zapotac weavers, and just have a good session about what is important to our culture of weaving. And maybe we can have a meeting of the minds and part as friends, and each of us go back into our own artistry. And it's a dream of mine, but hopefully it comes true. But they are willing to talk. The Textile Museum asked me to do programming for their museum. And I went there, and Hector, the museum curator, said, I can't pay you money. Americans, we have this big money exchange that we can't do, but can you take dyes in exchange? And I said, yes. And I'm expecting a tiny little packet of cochineal, tiny little packet of indigo, which I was just pining for. And a month later, when I got home, I got 2.5 kilos of cochineal, 2.5 kilos of indigo that came in the mail, and it just about knocked me over. So that the I don't know how you say it. It's like the Silver Trail trade from Mexico City to Santa Fe. That still exists because we did a trade. But anyway, we also talked to Hector, and Hector said, we need to do a workshop of Navajo people and Zapotacs, and my museum is open for that. And the guy from the Botanical Gardens, Alejandro, said, I'm involved too. So we have a dye garden. I want you to come look at it, and maybe we can have the Navajo weavers come and tell us about their plants and things like that. So we have all these plans. We just don't have any money. But hopefully it will happen one day. And so the latest project that we did was with the Arizona Archaeological Historical Society out of Tucson. And they picked Barbara and me to lead a team of weavers to 4 storage places in Washington, D.C. So we visited the Textile Museum, the Museum of Natural History, and then NMAI, which is the National Museum of the American Indian. And we were able to go in there, and they gave us a list and said, pick 10 textiles. So they gave us digital files that we could pick. and it was very formal. We get there, they see us, we're charming, and they let us pull whatever we wanted. So at each storage place, I think we may have gone 30, 40 textiles at each place. And we had 2 younger weavers with us, Kevin Aspis and Elicio Curley. And these young men had so much energy. They were off like billy goats, just pulling drawers. And I was like, how is this possible when in the old days, we had to sit there with our hands folded and not really make a move. And so things are changing, generations are changing, and we have been really pleased to be reacquainted with our ancestors' textiles. The other thing they let me do was go into the provenance of the details on the pieces, and I was able to take out words that were disgusting. I hate the word lazy line, which I think is a racist term. I hate the word squaw. I hate all of that stuff is in there. So I'm letting them take it out because it doesn't belong there. It doesn't belong. It's not connected to any of our weavings. And so they allowed me to do that. And so I've been on this mission to really create a place where the admiration is there. I know that they're well cared for. That's not a problem with me. It's how they are viewed by other people. And so that's been my mission to this day. And that's the second thing, so we'll just go on. Okay, so we met, my sister met Lynda Legan down in Peru, and Lynda had been a publisher of Thrums, and she asked Barbara if she would be interested in writing a book. And she said, well, I can help, but my sister's the one that talks and talks and talks, and she can write about it. So, and it was fortunate that Lynda lived in Loveland and I lived in Denver. So we met for lunch, and we talked about what this book would be like. And we were able to interview a lot of weavers. We chose male weavers, elder weavers, mid-career weavers, and young weavers. And we told their stories. And what was really different about this was when we talked to the elders, a lot of elders held back because they said, oh, we talk to people all the time writing books. And then when I read it, it's nothing like what I told them. They're making stuff up. There's stuff I didn't say. And I said, this is not going to happen because we're going to talk in Navajo. If you want to talk Navajo, we'll talk in English if you want to talk English. And I'm going to let you read what I wrote before it gets printed. And much to Lynda and Karen Brock's credit, they let me do what was right by these elders. And I think there's really good people in the world that is helping Navajo weaving stay as true to form. And that's it. So if there's any questions.
Before anybody here asks any questions, we forgot to give the broader world out there the phone number. We're not an interactive system here. And Lindsay, your phone number is, so this is where you can call, This is where you can call to leave messages or text messages or send WhatsApps. Not call, right? What?
Microphone.
Okay. But what's the number?
Oh.
You've got the microphone.
It's on?
I don't know.
Hello? Okay, perfect, thank you. If anybody watching the live stream wants to send in a message or a question, my phone number and my WhatsApp are both 1-937-216-4160. 1-937-216-4160. It's also in your email. So does anyone have a question?
I have a question about the Santa Fe Indian Market. You talked a lot about that, and one of the things that intrigued me that I wanted to learn more about was this whole process for giving ribbons, this competitive evaluation in a sense for all of this amazing work that's so intrinsic to your culture. So I was wondering who the judges are.
Well, the judges vary from year to year. And sometimes they are curators, sometimes they're gallery owners, sometimes there are weavers themselves. Santa Fe Indian Market has been in existence for over 100 years. And they were basically there to give the Pueblo potters a chance to sell their pots. And it started kind of morphing into more of an art market later on. And then it was just exclusively Southwest tribes. And as new directors come and go, the market has expanded, and it's now just not the market anymore, it's other shows. They have like a film festival, they have fashion shows, and it's just gotten bigger and bigger. And I think there's even some artists coming down from Canada as well. But there are ribbons for every distinct categories: pottery, sculpture, photographing, jewelry, of course, textiles. And then textiles are divided into classifications. You've got your revival pieces, you have traditional, you've got contemporary, and then you have clothing, and you have, and then there's a piece for the Pueblo section, Pueblo kilts and mantas and sashes and things like that. And so every year the judges vary. And in 2011, I had a big piece, which was a child's blanket, and Michael had a huge two-gray, and they chose Barbara as a judge that year. And we were like, oh, no. But the thing was, she could recuse herself, and so she couldn't vote for our pieces. But my piece went up to Best of Classification, and it was up for Best of Show. And I'm just like, darn, if Barbara wasn't a judge, I probably would have won Best of Show. But, that's how that goes.
I have one comment and one question. The comment first is, I live in Teotitlan del Valle for half of the year, and I live with a family of weavers. I live with Eric Chavez Santiago, who was the founding director of education at the Textile Museum. And this family, 25 years ago, decided to switch over entirely into natural dyes and to no longer reproduce Navajo designs because of the idea that every culture has its own identity and no culture should be appropriating the symbology, the deeper meaning of another culture.
Thank you.
Second question is, how do you differentiate between artist and artisanry? Can you explain the meaning, the difference between the two, or are they converging, and why?
Okay, well, the definitions for me is blurred because those are English terms and it's very colonial. Our thing is, as a Navajo weaver, you live as a Navajo. We have certain protocols that we go through. If you're a male, if you're a female, we go through puberty, and it's how you accept those lessons and how you make a living. I mean, I could be a pharmacist, and I would strive to do the best that I can with that particular trade. It just so happens that I'm a weaver. And as a weaver, I strive to be a great artist, but I also am cognizant in making sure that the world sees us as a force to be reckoned with, and that they see the resiliency of our ancestors. So for me, those words really doesn't penetrate to me. It's blurred, but for me, I know who I am. I speak my language. I talk about my art. I talk about my family. All of those are one thing to me. And when I meet younger Navajos, I speak to them about that so that they make a choice. And hopefully a lot of them are taking on those lessons.
Who else has a question? Oh, okay, come in the middle.
I was interested, you said you're a storyteller about the rugs, and I wondered if you could tell us the story of the cheesy grin first blue ribbon rug.
Well, that was at Two Gray Hills. That was at Two Gray Hills, and I grew up making Two Gray Hills. And one of the things that when we do our Two Gray Hills, I was using hand spun, and my Aunt Margaret Yazzie, whom we lost 2 years ago, used to have her own flock of sheep, and so did my grandmother. My grandmother, my aunts, and my mom all have arranged marriages. And so when my Aunt Margaret had her arranged marriage, her husband came with a flock of sheep. So that was great for her. That set her up as a weaver. And my grandmother, though, when her first husband, they had no sheep. And so when her husband died, which is my grandfather, the father of my mom and my Aunt Margaret, so my grandmother Susie had 2 sets of families, the older girls, and then she had a younger set. With the younger set, she told her mother, the next arranged marriage is please find a man with sheep, which happened. And so she was able to amass a whole flock of sheep. And this is after the livestock reduction, because in the 1930s, government people said that our grasslands were decimated and there was a drought going on, and the way to deal with it was just to slaughter animals. And that put the weavers for the first time in a position to have to buy their wool, and it devastated a lot of our art as weavers. And not only did they have to buy their wool, they were in a debt to the trading posts, who put an interest payment on that debt, and it never got out of it. And so there's such a really long history of poverty stemming from that livestock reduction. And once once my Aunt Margaret had her own sheep, we would have to come home once or twice a year to shear, and then we would process all that wool. And after we lost my Aunt Margaret, we lost our ability to get Navajo sheep. So now what my sister and I do is we go to wool festivals and we buy roving. And so we've cut out the carding phase and now we spin. And there's nothing wrong with this, we also use commercial wool. And so a lot of people go, oh my God, you're admitting that you're not using all hand spun, but the commercial wool is thicker than what we would like. And so if it's fresh wool, my sister's able to unspin it, and they're usually in an S-spin. She can unspin and kind of tweak it a little bit and make it a little bit finer. So we still classify it as hand spun. So we kind of go, and then when we categorize them for jurying, we always mention that it's commercial but respun. So we try to classify things that way. Did that answer your question? And that cheesy grin was me using all the hand spun that was available to me, and I didn't have to spin any of that. It was left to my mom and my sister. And during COVID, when I was not able to visit my sister, I had to do my own spinning.
Okay, and we had a request from our followers online for the people asking questions to introduce themselves. So, Beverly, if you can say your name and where you're from.
Beverly Spears from Santa Fe. And speaking of craftsperson versus artist, what do you and other Diné weavers think about signing or not signing pieces?
A lot of weavers are now signing their pieces. They will weave in a little piece. Like Roy Cady has a signature. I'm trying to think who else has one. Florence Riggs, who wove our rug dresses. Her initials FR is in the corner piece of my dress. She also put a little dragonfly at my request on my dress. And so it's great that you can put your own signature on it, but for Two Gray Hills, I think it's not possible to put a signature on it, because for me it may devalue it I don't really know because I don't buy my own pieces. So, everybody's in a quandary about whether or not, because jewelers do it. Everything I'm wearing, I can identify the person who made it based on their initials on the back. But for weaving, it's different. But I really think that as time goes on, that we can do something that says you're the creator of that piece. The other thing is, in the old days, in the mid 1800s, there were a lot of pieces that were woven during Bosco Redondo, a lot of first phase, second phase, third phase, and none of them have names and faces on them. And now we're trying to figure out like what communities they may have been from, things like that, and it's just really hard to say. And I've done a lot of work with Dr. Ann Headland about trying to find the communities. And interesting about Ann is her favorite thing used to be wedge weaves. I don't know if she's still into that, but we kind of surmise things that wedge weave may have occurred in a community that was closer to a town, that it may have been from one family, because wedge weaves were kind of like a flash in the pan. They existed for just a short period and then it went away. So it's a big conundrum, like where did it come from, who were the weavers, and Kevin Aspis, whom I've mentioned as one of the very nice young man, is bringing the wedge weave back into the public. And now when you see a wedge weave, my mind goes to, is that a Kevin Aspis, or is it, and people know. So if you are a weaver of a certain regional style, people kind of know who you are. Like you can tell a Barbara Ornelas. I can walk into any gallery in Santa Fe and tell if my sister Roseanne's piece is in there, I'm going to recognize it. I'm going to recognize it by the fineness of the textile. I'm going to recognize it by the color combinations and the designs that come from my family. And we don't claim ownership to those particular designs because other weavers use it, but for us, it has a different meaning. So a lot of times people will say, well, I have this piece of rug or whatever, and what does it mean? And it's like, you have to talk to the weaver. The weaver's the one that will tell you that story. I can't make it up, and I don't know that weaver's story. So every piece is an individual art piece from a weaver, from a jeweler, from a potter, and it goes down the line.
Okay, we had a question from Regina in eastern New Mexico. Regina would like to know, when teaching new weavers, do you include spinning as part of the curriculum? If not, what yarn do you have new weavers use?
We use commercial yarn, Brown Sheep Company out of Mitchell, Nebraska. We start with worsted weight so that our warps are spaced at 4 warps to the inch. For intermediate weavers, we use sport weight Brown Sheep 1-ply wool, and that is available at any of the Navajo enterprises on the Navajo Nation. It's available in Gallup. It's available in any yarn shop that you can request. And no, we do not offer spinning as part of the class unless the people who sponsors the class request one. They may request a one-day spinning workshop, or they may request a one-day warping workshop, but we don't always offer it as a norm. Now, weaving classes to us is a business. So we do classes for sponsors such as Loom Dancer Odysseys, who takes a group of weavers down to Canyon de Chelly, and Barbara and I teach that class. And we have a really good relationship with the people who own Loom Dancer Odysseys, and they kind of let us do our own thing, but we also get to enjoy the place where our grandfather is from. So whoever we work with, we always have a really good relationship with, and we also strive to make sure that the people who take these classes have the best experiences, and that means we do not have them warp.
All right, see you, Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane from Northern California. You mentioned how much you dislike the term lazy line, and I wanted to know, what is the term that you would want us to use, if any? Because I've run across it many times myself.
I prefer sectional lines. Yes, because the weaver sat in one section and wove and tapered off. The next day, he or she would move to the next spot and weave, and they didn't connect, so it created these lines. And it's a section. It's not that he or she was lazy, but anyway, and we don't have that in our weaving. You know why? Because we have rolling chairs. I can weave a wide manta piece, and I have a rolling chair, and I can roll around, and I have really good weaving tools. I have really long needles, and I can just roll around back and forth, and I do section breaks inside almost a weft at a time so that my weaving doesn't go in like an hourglass. So those are things that we do to make sure our weaving lies flat. But the sectional weaving, I believe when I read Joe Ben Wheat's book, which was edited by Dr. Ann Hedlund, Ann was tasked with a light box, and she had to draw the lazy lines or sectional lines to determine if there was a pattern to it. And there was none. So we know it was just functional, and it wasn't part of the artistry of the design.
Okay, that's really interesting, because one of the things that I was told was that the lazy line had to do with going up, it was somehow symbolic of connecting to the universe. That's just nonsense.
No, it's nonsense. Yeah. So when Lynda Legan and I were talking about this book, I went to the National Laboratory in Santa Fe, which is the building is right next to the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. And there's a really, really generous librarian there by the name of Alison Colburn. She's from Canada, which is why she's so nice. But I went in there and I asked her, can you pull all the Navajo weaving books out for me? I just kind of want to skim them, Went to lunch, came back, 3 8-foot tables, and they were stacked probably about 4 feet high of Navajo weaving books. And I was like, that's a lot of books. So I said, okay, well, can you, in your database, can you tell me which of these are Navajo authors? Goose egg, none. No. And a lot of them were made in the time that our elders did not speak English. So how did they get the information? It was all observational. So if you came to my house and I was doing something quirky that day, if you were a reporter, and my little quirks would probably make it in the book as, this weaver does this as a part of her day. It's something that portrays to the public that I may be a weirdo or something, just, I don't know. It just makes me mad that that Navajo weavers are not considered experts of their own art. And that was one thing that I'm really grateful to Thrums Publishing about, is giving us a chance to talk to our elders and talking about their processes. And that I'm hoping that there will be other people behind me that do the same thing, because I think we as Native people have the best to say about our own art and how we live as a people.
Thank you. I could absolutely do this all day, but we've got time for about one more question. So who would like to go be our little capstone here?
So I was very happy to hear that. Now I've noticed a movement within the museum world that are inviting the natives of each of the communities to actually come in and not only look at it, but handle without white gloves the actual pieces. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about where how you see this new movement with new curators that are coming in who are really interested in engaging the community. I have had an experience with some of the epigraphers of Maya archaeology. They want to teach the Maya community their glyphs that they are, they got their PhD in, but they say, well, but we have so many now Mayans in this country that not only we teach in their home countries, but now we can also teach here. So I wonder what you're thinking about how this kind of new movement, a new access can actually evolve.
Yes, and I'm very thrilled because I think from 2010 on, when I am asked to participate in a exhibition or whatever, I'm not a prop. They don't just march me out and, I'm dressed up and they just kind of say, okay, you'll say this and blah, 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 and then we'll be done, kind of thing. It's different now to where I think the generation of curators that are coming up are they're sensitive to getting the appropriate word out. And to do so, they have to collaborate with us. So in the last few exhibitions, I have written for the catalog. I have written labels for how things are going to be displayed. We have gone in, and with gloves, we are handling the pieces because some of them have been treated with arsenic. And some of them have been, we don't know where they have been. There's a thing about Navajo weavers to where if we knew that the piece may have come from a grave site or if they have come from dubious places, we don't want to touch it. And you can actually get that feeling. There are also, my sister and I had a courtesy visit to the Met, and there was a huge piece on their conservation table. She came in, she had another group with her, and I was with another group, but we all met up in the conservatory room. She came in from one door, I came in from the other, and we saw this huge white Satio diamond woven Navajo style, and we immediately tagged it as a slavery rug. And we looked at each other, and we had that little, eye communication, and everybody noticed it, and they said, well, what's going on? And I go, this is a slave rug, and I'm not going near it. And they said, well, let's get the paperwork on it. So they got the paperwork, they read it, and at the very bottom said, it's a suspected slave rug. And I said, no, there's no suspect. This is a slave rug, and it has to be tagged as such. And it means that in the 1800s, economics, generational wealth were built on the slavery of Navajo weavers. Navajo weavers were specifically targeted to become slaves. And they went into homes of colonials, Mexicans, and Spanish households to undo their floor loom rugs and reweave them Navajo style. And the slavery period was a long period. When Lincoln was president, he was emancipating the slaves from the South, but in the West, the U.S. Army was the biggest perpetrator of slave trading. And there are a lot of trading post people that were involved with that, and they were known as slavers. Kit Carson was a slaver. And so there's a lot of documentation that says that. And there's a lot of Southwest businesses that built their businesses on that created generational wealth on the backs of Navajo weavers. And that slave period is a big blight in U.S. history that they have never acknowledged that. It's not in books, it's not in whatever, but if you get a hold of Hastings Claw's book, which is, Hastings Claw was from my community, and it was written by Francis Newcomb, who had the training post at Newcomb, New Mexico, where my mother is from. The very first part of that book, she talks to Hastings Claw and his relatives, and they all talked about having one or two of their relatives being taken as slaves. And so, you know, in these books that were written even by non-natives, they have like little references to it. The book by, there's another, I forget her name, she wrote a book on the northern style, the Satillo one, I don't even remember the name of it, like Rio Grande Textiles or something. She also mentions stuff about slavery in there and how when these captured natives were put in a group, some of them became carters, some of them became spinners, you know, and they were all to add to the production of Navajo textiles. And so that's that. And again, we're just now bringing that forth. And I actually purposely took those slides out of my presentation because I wanted this to be an upbeat presentation, and I'm so sorry to end it on that. Happy Navajo weaving can be a really happy occasion, you know.